We had travelled 5,000 miles for some sun and did not want weather like this. Winter had maintained its grip. Even Yellowstone Lake was still frozen over. But we soldiered on. The landscape looked bleak and very inhospitable.
They do look like swans, yes.
We stopped and parked to survey this wintry scene, leaving our nice warm coach. Yellowstone National Park covers 3,500 square miles and is 8,500 feet above sea level, and is home to bears, elk, buffalo, wolves, and many other smaller animals. We hope to see some of them. And there they were, our first buffalo. We drove on, and it was not long before we saw more. They are big, powerful beasts, and the advice is do not go within 30 yards of them. They can be very, very dangerous. Look at the size of his shoulders. Through the trees, someone spotted a bear, although it was a long way off.
The young one is walking in this direction.
And then another, right in front of us. Our tour manager, Wendy, goes into overdrive with a personal history of it as it ambles away. This was good. We'd seen buffalo and now a bear. Completely unperturbed by all the excitement in the coach, the bear ambled away to do his own thing. Excitement levels were now at a high, and suddenly buffalo in some number taking a stroll on the road. With bears and now buffalo over the side of the road, who could want for more? Are they trained to do this sort of thing, perhaps? Leaving the buffalo to their own devices, we went on to our next stop, which was Yellowstone's own canyon. With a mighty waterfall at one end, this was no small canyon. Far down below you can just see the river. Leaving the canyon, we drove on to see Mammoth Springs, which had an almost moon-like appearance. From deep within the earth, chemicals in boiling water rise and form a vast layer of calcium carbonate. Covered walkways enabled visitors to view these natural wonders. Other more acidic chemicals form rust-coloured pools. This is the height to which the calcium carbonate has grown over hundreds of years. On one side, nature has formed giant steps that look man-made before the mass of calcium carbonate gradually thins out to nothing. At other places in this extraordinary park, beautiful pools form, steaming gently. This is one of the geysers in Yellowstone and is known as Steamboat for some reason. Our guide told us that it spits and coughs and now and again puts on a show. Well, we thought, now is a good time for Steamboat to oblige. And it jolly well did.
Yes, well done.
This whole area is alive with activity. with steam issuing from hundreds of places. Huge pools of boiling mud bubble away endlessly.
Perhaps they're just like the warm earth, these creatures.
We drove on to see the most famous geyser. An impressive education centre has been built up around Old Faithful. Inside are stunning displays of information about Yellowstone. There's even a notice as to when Old Faithful will next give a show. One exhibit caught my eye, a beautiful grey wolf, so real you're almost wary of it. There were also TVs showing films warning people about how dangerous the animals can be. One film shows a male elk with magnificent antlers taking umbrage against someone. Another shows a bison getting really cross with some guy who was lucky to survive. Let's look at all this one again. Despite the warnings, we saw some Japanese guys getting quite close to the buffalo and had to be warded off by the rangers. The Old Faithful Geyser can be viewed from inside the centre in comfort, or one can make the short walk out to it. We decided to go and stand in the rain and cold and wait. And sure enough, Old Faithful performed right on time. This geyser has been performing faithfully, hence its name, for hundreds of years. The grey skies and lack of sunshine took some of the magic away, but here was nature in the raw. Some wag was convinced there was a chap underneath with a steam hose, but he didn't get much support on that one. Steam continued to gush out of the hole in the ground for about 15 minutes, and then, slowly but surely, it diminished, fading away to nothing. And so the show was over, and it was time to move on. We drove on, and suddenly someone shouted, "Elk on the right!" Gary, our driver, stopped, and Wendy got agitated. We all piled out, cameras clicking. Our first elk. Not really very exciting, but a good study of the back of one. Leaving Yellowstone Park, we journeyed on with snow-covered mountains on our left and ahead of us. Our next visit was to Jackson Lodge, built by the side of Jackson Lake, and from where we had a stunning panoramic view of the Teton Mountains, which are part of the Rockies. The lodge is quite magnificent. Various American presidents have stayed here, including John F. Kennedy, Nixon, Reagan, and Bill Clinton. A grizzly bear keeps watch on everyone. Standing 7 foot tall, they can be very dangerous if made angry. Their teeth are bad enough, but beware of their claws. Decorating the walls are some marvellous paintings. Here's a mean-looking grizzly, and a buffalo with a herd of them in the background. But my favourite was this one of the wolf, which is a wonderful study. In the corner, a real log fire crackles away, sounding like pistol shots. Leaving the lodge, we continued on our way and drove south. and at last we saw up ahead some blue sky and sunshine. We all felt better and drove on much happier to arrive at a place called Afton, where we would stop for a while and have a coffee break. We arrived just in time to see the last covered wagon full of settlers hoping for a new life in the west. The archway over the road, you can see, is made up entirely of antlers from elk. It's supposed to be the largest in the world. And the notice proudly says Afton, Wyoming. These people obviously decided it wasn't such a good idea after all and are going back. Soon after leaving Afton, we left Wyoming and crossed the state line into Utah with its familiar red rocks and soil. In glorious, hot, sunny weather, we were about to walk through our first canyon. We were at altitude and in 85-degree heat and needed to keep drinking water to avoid dehydration. This was Archer's Canyon, so called because of the way nature has shaped the rocks, which we would see later. The surrounding scenery was breathtaking, as was a strong wind that whistled around our ears. A tricky path took a little negotiating, as it led us down towards the floor of the canyon. To be surrounded by these towering rocks was fascinating, and it was almost like being on another planet. As we continued to go down, the temperature rose. The massive walls of rock seemed to go on up and upwards, dwarfing us into insignificance. The group ambled on, confronted at every turn by different rocky edifices. Cameras clicked continuously as hundreds of photographs were taken from every angle of these gigantic rocky outcrops, carved by nature into futuristic shapes and massive bulks. This one looked like a giant's set of cricket stumps. After a wonderful walk, we were coming to the end of the canyon and the outcrops began to get fewer. One chap had had enough and called the Starship Enterprise to beam him up. Passing one more enormous rock, we came to the very end of this part of the canyon. It was interesting to note that despite the dry, dusty ground and the heat, some flowers managed to survive. Our coach made a welcome sight after a wonderful and exciting walk through the hot and dusty first part of Archer's Canyon. We drove off and Wendy gave us instructions as to what would happen next.
Where Gary is going to be waiting for us. Coming up shortly, I'm going to point out Balanced Rock 2. Rock fell down during the winter, and here we are, Balanced Rock coming up on your right hand side. Well, than walking across what I would call the roundabout. Once again, please.
Leaving our air-conditioned coach, it was back to baking hot temperatures, surrounded by a range of gnarled and weather-beaten rocks. This was the other part of Archer's Canyon. It was not long before the arches came into view. Still at altitude, even a climb up a slope like this, left one short of breath. Beyond the uniquely shaped arches, apart from a few isolated rocks, was desert, empty and inhospitable. In the distance, the stunning snow-capped Rocky Mountains. Driving on through the desert, we made for a place called Four Corners. This is at the point where 4 states, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico and Arizona, meet. You can be in all 4 at the same time if you wish. Journeying on over virtually deserted roads, and our driver's mascot, Buster Bronco, keeping an eye on everyone, we travelled further south through Utah to come to our next comfort stop. And what better place to stop than by a beautiful blue lake called Bear Lake. Apparently an abundance of chemicals in the water give it this wonderful colour continuously. Another hour or so's travelling in our comfortable coach, and we came to our destination, Salt Lake City, with the snow-capped mountains in the distance glistening in the sun. We drove on, first of all, to see the vast Salt Lake that the city is named after. We stopped by the harbour, which is a home to many yachts, and then looked out upon this vast expanse of water. It is the largest salt lake in Western Hemisphere, and the 4th largest in the world. It is 75 miles long and 35 miles wide. The Straits of Dover are only 22 miles, and is at 4,200 feet above sea level. It is saltier than the sea and similar to the Dead Sea. In fact, it is often called America's Dead Sea. It's an ideal place to go sailing on, but it's best not to go too far out. It's a big lake. Salt Lake City was founded by Mr. Brigham Young in 1874. He was the leader of the Mormons, who came with a wagon train and stood roughly where this spot is, saw the valley and said, "This is the place Salt Lake City was born." An impressive monument marks the spot, but we will come back to this later.